This LOS is explained special considerations when evaluating the credit of high-yield, sovereign, and non-sovereign government debt issuers and issues. Special considerations of high-yield, sovereign, and non-sovereign credit analysis. For high-yield bonds with their greater risk of default, more emphasis should be placed on an issuer's sources of liquidity as well as on its debt structure and corporate structure. Credit risk can vary greatly across an issuer's debt structure depending on the seniority ranking. Many high-yield companies have complex capital structures resulting in different levels of credit risk depending on where the debt resides. So continuing with high yield, we're going to look at liquidity. Liquidity, that is having cash and or the ability to generate or raise cash, is important to all issuers. It is absolutely critical for high yield companies. Thus, issuer liquidity is a key focus in high yield analysis. Sources of liquidity from strongest to weakest are the following. 1, cash on the balance sheet. 2, working capital, which is current assets minus current liabilities. Operating cash flow, bank credit facilities, equity issuance, and finally asset sales. Continuing with financial projections. Because high yield companies have less room for error, it is important to forecast or project future earnings and cash flow out several years, perhaps including several scenarios, to assess whether the issuer's credit profile is stable, improving, or declining, and thus whether it needs other sources of liquidity or is at risk of default. Next, we'll look at debt structure. A high-yield issuer will often have at least some of the following types of obligations in its debt structure. 1, secured bank debt. 2, second lien debt. 3, senior unsecured debt. 4, subordinated debt, which may include convertible bonds. And finally, 5, preferred stock. An equity-like approach to high-yield analysis can be helpful. Calculating and comparing enterprise value with EBITDA and debt to EBITDA can show a level of equity cushion or support beneath an issuer's debt. Covenant analysis. Covenant analysis is especially important for high-yield bonds. Key covenants include payment restrictions, limitations on liens, change of control, coverage maintenance tests, often limited to bank loans, and any guarantees from restricted subsidiaries. Covenant language can be very technical and legalistic, so it may help to seek legal or expert assistance. Key covenants for high-yield issuers may include the following. 1, change of control put. 2, restricted payments. 3, limitations on liens and additional indebtedness. And 4, restricted versus unrestricted subsidiaries. Moving on to sovereign debt now. Sovereign credit analysis includes assessing both an issuer's ability and willingness to pay its debt obligations. Willingness to pay is important because due to sovereign immunity, a sovereign government cannot be forced to pay its debts. In assessing sovereign credit risk, a helpful framework is to focus on 5 broad areas. 1, institutional effectiveness and political risks. 2, economic structure and growth prospects. 3, external liquidity and international investment position. 4, fiscal performance, flexibility and debt burden. And finally 5, monetary flexibility. Continuing with sovereign debt, we've got a long list here of 14 items that among the characteristics of a high quality sovereign credit are 1, absence of corruption and or challenges to political framework. 2, governmental checks and balances. 3, respect for rule of law and property rights. 4, commitment to honor debts. 5, high per capita income with stable, broad-based growth prospects. 6, control over reserve or actively traded currency. 7, currency flexibility. 8, low foreign debt and foreign financing needs relative to receipts in foreign currencies. 9, stable or declining ratio of debt to GDP. 10, low debt service as a percentage of revenue. 11, low ratio of net debt to GDP. 12, operationally independent central bank. 13, track record of low and stable inflation. And finally, 14, a well-developed banking system, and active money market. And we're down to one last slide on non-sovereign government debt, and we'll do one practice question and this LOS will be finished. So non-sovereign government debt. Non-sovereign or local government bonds, including municipal bonds, are typically either general obligation bonds or revenue bonds. General obligation bonds are backed by the taxing authority of the issuing non-sovereign government. The credit analysis of general obligation bonds has some similarities to sovereign analysis: debt burden per capita versus income per capita, tax burden, demographics, and economic diversity. Underfunded and off-balance sheet liabilities, such as pensions for public employees and retirees, are debt-like in nature. Revenue-backed bonds support specific projects, such as toll roads, bridges, airports, and other infrastructure. The credit worthiness comes from the revenues generated by usage fees and tolls levied. And one last practice question to finish this LOS. Which of the following factors in credit analysis is more important for general obligation non-sovereign government debt than for sovereign debt? A, per capita income, B, power to levy and collect taxes, or C, requirement to balance an operating budget? Okay, C is correct. Non-sovereign governments typically must balance their operating budgets and lack the discretion to use monetary policy as many sovereigns can. Okay, so power to levy and collect taxes, that's more important for sovereign debt. And the per capita income, again, that's at the country, more important for the sovereign debt. Correct answer is C. And that's the last slide for this LOS. Thank you.